Today I want to tell you a story in which the protagonist experienced tremendous tenderness at the same time as they faced indescribable grief. I'll tell you everything chronologically. Danielle and Matt met by accident. He was rushing to work and she was late for an exam. In a hurry, the young people ran into each other and exchanged glances. At exactly that moment, a spark passed between them, but each one was in a rush and there was no time to chat. But fate had its own plans and brought them back together in a few months. The confident Matt and kind like an angel Danielle had a lot in common. They could talk for hours and the couple dreamed of seeing the whole world together. Their innocence was inspiring. They could spontaneously get on a motorcycle and head to the sea to look at an entrancing sunset, and then head back to the city. In short, their love was boundless and pure. Each one believed that they would stay together until their dying breath. Soon afterwards, the young and ambitious couple stunned their loved ones by announcing that they want to get married. "What's the rush?" asked their parents. Many said that they were acting this way only because of their young age and crazy passion. But Danielle and Matt were not planning on changing their decision. They became husband and wife. Their happiness was so endless that nobody could imagine that it would soon be replaced by fear and helplessness. On that fateful day, it seemed like everything was going wrong since the very morning. Danielle broke a mug in the kitchen. Everything was falling out of her hands, and she felt a kind of anxiety in her heart. She tried to drive away those feelings and began to do household chores, when suddenly Matt's phone rang. Even though it was already getting dark, his boss asked him to come into the office to deal with some issues at work. Danielle sadly recalls that she didn't want Matt to go because she didn't want him to have to return home in the dark. She didn't understand why work issues had to be dealt with in the evening, but Matt insisted on going because his boss could get angry if he didn't go. She had no choice but to see him off. Several hours passed, and Matt was supposed to have come back home, but that wasn't the case. Danielle felt that something was wrong. It turned out that her intuition wasn't off. Her anxiety was interrupted by a phone call. The phone screen read, "My love," and Danielle sighed with relief. But what she heard on the other end of the line completely changed her life. She picked up the phone and heard a stranger's voice. She shivered and lost the ground from under her feet. The man kept talking, but she had no idea what he was saying. All she could remember was, "Crash. ICU. Come." Danielle rushed to the hospital as tears streamed down her face. She hoped that her beloved husband was alive. They could handle everything else so long as he was alive. At the hospital, she found out that Matt crashed his motorcycle at high speed into a car that was parked illegally right on the highway. After such a crash, his chances of survival were practically non-existent. Surprisingly, the young man was alive despite his many injuries. The doctors said that Matt had brain damage and many broken bones. He was in a coma. For over a week, Danielle sat by Matt's hospital bed, but he did not regain consciousness. The doctors shrugged, unable to give any reassuring prognoses. About a month passed in such a way. Danielle spent night and day in the hospital, giving up on her work, studies, and all other responsibilities. She believed that her beloved would soon open his eyes, but it didn't happen. 1 month after the crash, a doctor entered the hospital room and said that there was no sense in prolonging Matt's suffering, and that it was probably best to take him off life support. He couldn't stay at the hospital any longer, and experience showed that after a month without improvement, there was unlikely to be any in the future. Each day, the chances of him waking up diminished. At that moment, Danielle was in incredible pain and had to make an important decision. She was told that there was only a 3% chance of Matt coming out of the coma, and even if such a miracle happened, Matt would forever stay disabled and bedridden. In her brain, Danielle understood that it was probably best to let Matt die in peace, but her heart told her otherwise. The young woman was well aware of the fact that her husband's life was entirely in her hands. Despite the advice of doctors, friends, and relatives who told her that it would probably be for the best, that she was still young with her whole life ahead of her, Danielle decided to never unplug the machines that kept Matt alive. She believed that her husband was strong and was able to overcome this because he once promised that he would never abandon her. It doesn't matter if he stayed disabled so long as he was alive. Danielle was by her husband day and night. She asked him to come back because she couldn't live without him, but nothing changed. After a few more days, the doctor said that there was no point in Matt staying at the hospital any longer. There were two choices, the one that Danielle was against, or to take Matt home. Danielle was actually happy about this because she was sure that the home environment would have a positive impact on his condition. The chances of Matt waking up were minimal. Matt's condition did not improve for several months, but Danielle was not giving up. She spent all her life savings on organizing a place for him at home. She talked to him, hugged and kissed him. Caring for her bedridden husband was exhausting, physically and emotionally. It's hard to imagine what she felt, seeing her loved one who was once strong and full of life in a totally helpless state. Even though everything was as bad as it could be, she kept fighting for his life. Danielle went into debt and asked her friends and relatives for money. Of course, they helped her, but at the same time, their belief in a positive outcome diminished every day. One day, her family decided to talk to her. They asked her to let him go, but once again, she said no. At that point, nobody believed that a miracle could happen. Her persistence and boundless love did their job. Despite the pessimistic attitude of doctors and everyone around him, Matt opened his eyes. She went up to Matt one morning to administer his medicine and saw that he was looking at her. She couldn't believe it and began to cry from joy. It happened about a year after the crash. Matt began to follow Danielle's gaze. Even though he could communicate only with his eyes, Danielle was happy that he could understand her. At that point, Danielle believed that everything would work out. She just needed to not lose faith and to continue working with her husband. Injections, IVs, physical therapy, all this was her responsibility. During the time she spent caring for her husband, Danielle lost a lot of weight. She had bags under her eyes. Sometimes, Danielle would simply collapse from exhaustion, but she had no intention of giving up. One day, something happened that re-energized her. "I will always remember the day," Matt whispered, "I'm fighting." This phrase filled me with strength. At that point, I knew that I wasn't alone, and that he was also doing everything possible to come back, said Danielle. It turned out that Matt was a strong man. Together with his caring wife, he was fighting for his recovery. 2 weeks after those words, Matt moved a finger, and a few days after that, he smiled. Of course, both of them understood that a hard road was ahead. Matt had to relearn to speak, control his body, and develop fine motor skills. No matter how difficult and painful, Matt continued to work hard. Actually, he had no choice because the whole time he could hear and knew that his wife was not giving up. So what right did he have to let her down? That's exactly what happened. Months of intensive and non-stop therapy did not go in vain, and Matt started to walk. At first, he used a walker. He was already lucid. He joked, rejoiced at every small victory, and continued to work hard. Doctors were shocked by Matt's progress. Till the very end, they didn't believe that Matt would come out of the coma. And if he did, they thought that he would be bedridden for the rest of his life. But Danielle's love and willpower worked wonders. It took almost 4 years for Matt's life to return to normal. He himself says that it's all thanks to Danielle. If it wasn't for her love, he wouldn't be alive today. The tragedy that happened to Matt tested the strength of the young couple's feelings for each other. Even though it is hard to imagine, Danielle continued to fight for Matt even 3.5 years after the crash. She fought even when nobody else had faith. Thanks to her support, today, the young man is almost completely healthy. Matt and Danielle's story is incredibly touching and inspiring. Thanks to their faith and great love, the young couple was able to overcome difficult circumstances, even when all predictions did not give them a chance. Their story was shown on national TV and made tens of thousands of people cry. Perhaps this is true love expressed in care, devotion, and faith.